Let's have lesson 1 first. Okay, so makita ninyo ni? Sige. So our topic is more on sustainable urban engineering for CEM2 or civil engineering major. And sustainable because the word comes from the main root, which is sustain, and then the second root, which is able, the ability to sustain something. Okay, so retain or preserve something. And urban engineering is related to the environment that we have right now, which is a city. And the engineering part is because its application is not just for civil engineering, but all forms of engineering that needs to have or to advance sustainable urban application. So, so today for sustainable urban engineering CE major 1, we will have introduction to concepts. So sustainability again is a two-coined word, sustainable and the ability, ableness of something. So sustainability is coined as a word because it is meant to bridge the gap between development or advancement and our environment, whether it's community or it's either community that's built environment or our ecosystem, which is our natural environment. So in sense, it is saying that we have to have the people in consideration, which is related to people's development of their communities. And the other consideration is our environment, which is the planet, the earth, the ecosystem, the flora and fauna, and so forth and so on. So sustainability comes from the actually an existing application of terminology which is used in fishery, in forestry, and hydrology. So usually when we talk about sustainability before, we use it as a term for maximum sustainable yield, for pumping water, or maximum sustainable cut for a forest area in terms of trees, and cutting trees with replacement. No, so when we cut old trees because they're no longer yielding, we need to replace them with new trees that has to be more yielding, or we have to replace a number or area of the forest so that we will have a maintained forest, which is rich in old aged tree and replacing them with young harvest them or catch them, and then again doing the cycles of things, replacing the old mature fish with younger fish hut nursery so that you can sustain yourself a future yield of catch of fishes. So these are actually then adopted later on when we jump off to the Brundtland Commission or United Nations Commission on our Common Future in 1987. So the Brundtland Commission was then developed, or then was a conference where the United Nations and other nations of the world responded to the call for sustainable development. Now, it is defined to be sustainability in sense because it's actually the applications of sustaining something, and that sustainable application is actually in terms of development. Now, again, development is advancement, no? So, development that meets the needs of the present today without compromising the ability of the future generation to meet their own needs. So the people or the future generation of tomorrow to meet their own needs. So suma total, it's just saying what we consume or do now should not be just for the present condition, but also for the future conditions of those who will live in the future, who will be using the resources that we are uh, enjoying right now, at the same time to also gain as much in terms of what we have now then preserved for their future application. So that's sustainable development. Now, sustainable development in application is a very good example when we talk about Batad rice terraces, which is heralded as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, because in the Philippines, this is actually a best example of sustainable agriculture, no? So sustainable agriculture wherein we know fully that the terrain in Baguio area or Batad people uh, spread itself across the rice fields and the crops. And then of course, because wala may drainage sa una, they made their own canal lines, canals, or natural drainage system, ensuring that water flows from flow by virtue of gravity without the need for pumping. Okay, pumping is making use of energy and machine to pump water from maybe higher to lower elevation and so forth. But in this case, by virtue of gravity, water will flow down to lower elevation. So in summa total, in one sense, the Batad rice terrace as an example of sustainable agriculture, because the whole year they will be able to enjoy water from the top of the plateau. They will have a reservoir. That reservoir will distribute water across the rice field in the area, and the water will not be wasted because it will trickle down from top to bottom of the rice fields with respect to the terrace being made. And then the end part, sa bottom, you will have a reservoir again for the utilization of water for people who have excess water from the rice field. So other uses of water then will serve its community in a way, recycling whatever is the water from the top to the bottom, being excess water for the community's use, no? Okay. So this is sustainable application in sense. And in concept, this is sustainable agriculture. But if we look at it in the engineering side of things, it's sustainable conservation of water. And for agriculture or science, it's also related to conservation of water. And sa atong case sa engineering is conservation and water system application for agriculture. So this one is a very good application for sustainable, example of sustainable engineering. Okay. Now, in contrast, we have unsustainable application. And this is a concrete example that happened in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, where portions of land area is being used for agriculture. In this case, kay clay man siya, no? But some of the areas actually nga vivid guys, example sa Rio de Janeiro area is when they utilize land for crop yields such as oil from soybeans and sunflower crops, because these are maybe used for biofuel. Biofuel can either be used as a replacement for gasoline or diesel, can also be used for cooking, and can also be used for cosmetics and medicines and whatnot. No, so that's the use for biofuel. But biofuel, in a way, is unsustainable for the case of Rio de Janeiro because some of the forests are converted into agricultural lands, and these agricultural lands are crop application. So crop manggod nga application is annual. So pag umasa isa ka tuig, i-harvest and then pull out ang plant. And so the soil, the ground becomes unsustainable because you will have erosion, you will have kanang dust, and you will have also possibilities of flood and landslide later on. In this case, they utilize some part of the forest for clay extraction. Okay, they will use clay for some immediate needs of the community. It's very unsustainable because the land in itself is destroyed for this purpose of human needs, no? Okay. So that's in contrast with the one that we have for Batag Rice Terraces and for Rio de Janeiro na case. So if we go back to the understanding of sustainable applications, noting that we have two examples, there are two reinforcing ideas from Repetto and Monasing. He said, like Repetto or Robert Repetto, he mentioned that the core idea of sustainability is that the current decisions that we have or we dictate in the community should not impair the prospects of maintaining or improving the future living standards of people for the future. So it would mean na atong mga decision karon, ang atong activities karon should not jeopardize or impair future applications of the future generation. If we want a sustainable application of our community, we have to make sure that our economic development should be managed in such a way that the excess or the dividends of our economic development will also be the benefit of the future generation. So matutal, they also benefit from what we're doing now. Ang dili kay sila ang maalkanse sa atong gipambuhat karon. So ang akong example lagi ani is when we talk about the resources that we have in the community right now should not be depleted in such a way that the future generation will have no more resources to use or to um, to be resources to be provided for them, that they will be able to be they will be then deprived of such resources. So an example na ko is kung na kay organization and then usually sa start of the year or usually sa isa ka organization we generate or gain funds because each of our members are paying for the organization's fee, no? So the start of the year, daghan kay katag kwarta kay nakakuha ta og kwarta from our members, both old and new members. And so we develop some plans and programs para sa atong organization nga mo-flourish siya the entire year. And that is good, no? Because we're using our resources to enable our members be part of the organization at the same time, be productive in terms of our activities. However, when the the next leadership of the organization will be happen to be next year, it should be that ang atong activities also today includes them, no? So that in a way we look at things in a more sustainable and future application. Dili na tuhot doon ang kwarta karon because kita ang nag-lead karon. Dili na tuhot doon ang kwarta karon because daghan kay gusto mabuhat karon nga activities para sa atong members, and yet ma-deprive nato ang next nga group of leaders because nagkautang-utang ta sa atong activity karon. No, it's not correct. It is wrong. Should be nga atong gibuhat karon will be enough so that ang extra ihatod nato para ang next nga maging leaders o next nga mga organization members will be able to also benefit from us and will can start up on their own because we have given them the dividends of our resources. Okay? So in all forms na siyang resources, no? So the same na sa environment. To make it sustainable, what we have lived today should also be their benefit in the future. And we do not consume so much this present time in such a way that we deprive the future generation of our benefits and our resources at this present time. In that sense, Repetto is trying to say that all resources should be managed appropriately. And then economic development should not be jeopardizing resources that will be then a problem in the future. Now, Monaseng also said, Monaseng here or something, also said that in this aspect of understanding sustainability, we have actually to look at three areas of concern. First, it's economic. Second is ecological. And third is social-cultural. So economic, according to him, is that we maximize our income, our financial resources today, maintaining a constant or increasing stock of capital. So maintaining is dili hukdon ibilin pirmaminti ang korta nga mabilin, or we invest so that ang original capital will be maintained, and then ang atong interest na makuha will be the one that will be used then for the organization. That's economic development, because in a sense we have money for our use today, but we don't use so much of that money or resources that will jeopardize the future application. Ecological application para sa iya po means that we maintain resilience and robustness of our biological and physical system. So ecological would mean we maintain our environment, make it resilient and robust, so that in a way these systems will not be jeopardized in a future generation. So ang atong mga forests, atong mga historical land area, atong cultural and values sa community, whatever is the community's physical form and biological form in terms of the environment, should be preserved, so that ang future generation will also be able to see them, will also be able to value them, will also be able to see them as part of the community. Dili nato siya gubaon, dili nato siya i-compromise just because we want economic development. Okay, the third one is socio-cultural. It means that we maintain the stability of our social community, its culture, and its value. So basically, it's related to people, no? So kung ang economic is related to money, ecological is related to the environment and the history or value of a city, it's all, the third one is more on some people behind that community. So it's related to the culture of the people and the social needs of the people in that community. So we maintain them, we enrich them in such a way that they will be valued, like ang atong pagiging Pilipino, atong pagiging makatao, or something like what defines us as a people, no? So stability would also mean that we, even if midaghan ang atong population sa usa ka community, wala tay issue sa safety, wala tay issue sa health concern, wala tay issue sa poverty, because we are also protecting our people from experiencing crimes, from experiencing sickness, or from experiencing poverty and the lack of resource sa basic needs sa tao. So that's socio-cultural. In fact, apil pa ana ang atong language, ang atong value sa community, ang atong history, no? Those things are related to culture. The things that we do in our everyday activities, even to the point of saying atong food, we maintain what is really Filipino cuisine. So mga nang ating, so these are related to socio-cultural application for sustainability. Now, what is it then that makes some things unsustainable? So there are three drivers of unsustainable application. So ang first one is when we define it in terms of the consumption levels, the production, and the distribution. Consumption is a driver of unsustainability when we talk about people over time consuming so much, at the end of the line, wasting so much. The other one is when we consume so much, or we need so much of a product, then the next thing that will happen is we have so much production of something, and again, excess of that becomes a waste. So production-wise, maybe the supply is more than the demand, no? And then the other item of that is distribution. So distribution can happen to be that we need to human or people would need certain services or certain needs for basic essential needs, and then this one requires distribution of that item. Distribution would require supposedly an equitable application, so walay bias, no? So it should have been shared to everyone. Unfortunately, that is not true. Sometimes the distribution is only good for people who has the money to buy or the money to pay for that given services or goods. So it's not then equitable for those who cannot afford it. So that's distribution in sense. Now, in engineering, we are more into the idea that ang example is cutting of trees, no? Because way back in 1970s, a lot of people are using lumber and wood for construction of shelter and housing, no? Not so much of building, but more so with housing and construction of houses and shelter. So at over time, daghan tagikat nga trees nga hardwood, no? Endemic in the Philippines and endangered species in the Philippines just because we want to build a house. But eventually we realized that cutting these trees endangered our forest preservation for trees which are essential to our community as well. So consumption of materials for construction such as trees and hardwood became an issue. So in 1970, during the time of Marcos, our president then, what happens is that a lot of people who are environmentalists went to the streets and rallied that we should preserve our trees because it's not sustainable to cut them over time. We know fully at that time also a lot of industries were based on logging and hardwood industries. So what happened then is because a lot of people complained, there were then legislations being pushed for against cutting of trees. So then at that time, the logging operations was then stopped, and only few trees, few cutting or industries of wood were allowed to a certain degree. And then eventually, nawala na gyud dayon ang cutting of trees because we have a logging ban. So logging ban happened for quite some time, and then we realized that it's not always also good that we have so much of this regulation. So what happened is that we opened the opportunity for planting trees, which are fast growing trees and fast yielding trees, so that we can at least supply hardwoods for constructions and wood for applications which can sustain the community. So then we have falcata, gemelina, and all those kinds, or even coco lumber that's being used for as wood for housing, no, and shelter application, constructions of houses. So that is the reason why then we kind of uh, set the example of unsustainable becoming sustainable in part of civil engineering application, which is construction for buildings and houses. Now, the other kind of application of this for production is that when we say, yeah, so much is being cut off trees. I think in Asia, we're one of the first countries to really decide that we have to do logging ban of woods. And so therefore, because exportation, dahil na pag-export sa wood was then a thing of the past. A lot of things happen within, so we only have woods for our own country. We do not anymore send off woods for other countries' immediate demand. So wala na taga-supply of hardwood or wood sa ubang country. And in fact, after that, what nag-follow suit sa atua is Indonesia and Malaysia because they also found that this is not sustainable. Cutting trees for exports of paper and byproducts of wood for countries like Korea and Japan who benefits from this. Para sa ilang country, dili sila cut, no? Korea and Japan do not cut trees, but they buy wood from other poor countries in Asia. So that's the imbalance of opportunities when it comes to distribution, consumption, and production. So that's the best example that I could give. Another one is I could cite is the fact that mining industry, we are familiar with mining, no? Mining is usually done for certain applications such as mining of gold or mining of gemstones or mining of gemstones include diamonds, mining of metals, no? So metals are made from metallic materials which are mined, especially those which are metals from ore such as iron ore or uh, mixed with other metal materials to become uh, a very good kind of metallic ore or metallic steel. And we know fully that these materials are used for our building, no? So irons are made for iron works, and then steel works are made for our building, essential building structural parts. So, but then, if we look at it, these are mine items. No? Gimine sa atong mga bukid. And we destroy so much of this environment that we have because we want to mine a lot of this raw materials for our iron works and our steel works. Now, some of this, in fact, are exported abroad. No? Example, in Cagayan de Oro, we have Philippine Center. No? Philippine Center, which is in Taguluan, is mining operation is actually related to getting all metals from mining, and then these metals are made for metallic materials. But we are not producing the metal by product, no? We're just really smelting. Ang smelting would mean gi-burn na to siya para mahimo siyang blocks of metals or raw material siya, and then ipadala na to sa abroad para sila ang maghimo sa mga reinforcing steel bars, mga aluminum planes, iron nga mga materials, no? So we're not the one making the product itself. We are exporting raw materials for them to make this product. At the end of the line, kita ang nagpalit sa metal nga import nato, like reinforcing steel bars imported sometimes from other countries. And we buy these items. But to come to think of it, this is actually from our environment nga gi-extract nato para ma-produce as raw materials para sa country nga gahimo sa product na ibalik sa ato gibaligya. And that's actually a cycle of manufacturing engineering works. But the thing there is that we mine it from our country, and sometimes other country benefits from it. So when I went to Japan, for example, I can see a lot of metals from their ilang mga buildings, no? Aluminum for this and that, irons for this and that, metal, steel works for this and that. Tsada kay tan-awon, pero wala ko kadungog nga nagmina sila. Wala kay ko nakitaan sa Japan nga minahan. And it's because they mined in countries like Indonesia, in Vietnam, in the Philippines, and so forth and so on. And again, one example of that is tissue papers and papers in Japan are not actually from Japan. It's from Indonesia. And Indonesia suffers because they cut trees for these papers. So that's an example of unsustainable application. Okay, so because of these concerns, the UN, the United Nations, created the Sustainable Development Goals. Kung gusto ta mo lambo, mag-ingkod ta, magsabot ta unsa atong common nga goal sa atong development. Dili pwede nga isa lang ang ma-develop and then daghan must suffer. Should be nga common nato ang goal tanan para kitang tanan makinabang no sa atong development. So we call it then Sustainable Development Goals, and the SDGs is actually divided into 17 goals. One is the goal to end poverty of any forms, to end hunger. So we provide food, make sure that food is an agenda. Health is an agenda because we want everyone to be healthy. Education for all because we want to make sure that illiteracy will not be an issue to all countries across the globe. And women's rights, or women as a gender, will be given equal opportunity across, because some countries do not have prioritization for women and the needs of women. Some countries see women as a third rank in the gender system of their hierarchy. And then, of course, we want to ensure that water is as essential and basic needs of human of sustenance and and preservation, we have to have potable water. And in terms of comfort and shelter, we should have at least energy. And in terms of financial resource of the community, we should have better economy for all. And in terms of building communities, we should have infrastructure. And in terms of people and the rights of people, we need to reduce inequality. We need to make shelter or habitation for all. We need to ensure sustainable consumption of goods. We have to take into consideration climate because we are experiencing issues with climate with respect to our environment. We should protect our marine ecosystem because we're not just talking about land, we are also talking about water as our environment. And then ecosystem, aside from the marine, includes the land ecosystem. And then, of course, institutions in the community includes the provisions for uh, markets, hospitals, government offices, schools, church, etc. And then overarching sa 17 goals is the sustainability application. So this is our topic. Sustainability as one of the SDGs goal is to strengthen the means of implementation and revitalization of global partnership for sustainable development. So matotal, we have to sustain everyone in our community, in our country, in our region, in Asia, in our region, in our global community, so that we help each other grow. Dili nang kay isa ra ang mo grow, isa ra ang kinabang sa tanan. Okay. So sustainability principles basically defines the idea that we have to protect then the environment and the economic and social objective of a community. So ang operational criteria niya basis is that the economic goal, kung natay goal nga malambo atong syudad, something like that, should not be maximized without satisfying the limits of the environmental and social constraints, no? So dili ta pwedeng mapalambo kaayo nga dili na to or atong ma-jeopardize or compromise atong environment and atong mga tao ug ang social needs sa tao. The other one is environmental benefits. Environmental benefits or objectives should not be maximized so without satisfying economic and social constraints. So kung naatay environment nga gi-preserve, it should be nga ma-complement sa atong economic and social needs, no? So para sa tao, para sa ekonomiya sad siya. But not so much nga ato sad siyang i-jeopardize ang atong environmental need, no? Ang pag-preserve sa atong natural environment. The last aspect is social benefit. The social benefit should not be optimized or maximized without satisfying both economic and environmental constraints. So social benefit in terms of the needs of tao should not compromise economic development and environmental development. So matotal, economic growth and equity should not leave any region behind, or in sense ang growth sa usa ka city like Cagayan de Oro should be para sa tanan, dili lang para sa mga tao nga kwartahan sa Cagayan, no? It should be equitable for all. Ang benefit sa atong city should be also given from all forms of people behind the community. Second is that the people of Cagayan should preserve the natural resources that we have now so that atong future generation will not be deprived of these natural resources that we are benefiting right now. And more so atong social development as a city. Ang culture, ang atong values should be enriched, don't really jeopardize just because naatay economic need, no? So we ensure that the rich fabric of social and cultural diversity, the rights of workers, empowerments of people, at the same time ensuring jobs and education, food, shelter, energy, and health will be provided for so that we will be able to sustain our future generation. Legit lang ha. Chur? Chur tiko ni mo? Legit lang kayo ha. Naka 27 ko. And then, okay. So, because Canning sustainability principle was then categorized into three now, environment, economic, and social, then we were able to define sustainability of the Brundtland Commission by its pillars. No? So, ang pillar is that integrating sustainable development in our community policy and our national policy should be that it will address the threefold area: the area of social, the area of environment, and economic development. And underlying sa iyang foundation is the good governance and good financing. No? So, ang atong pag-share sa atong money should be equitable sa budget niya para sa environmental protection, pag-budget para sa economic development, pag-budget para sa needs sa tao sa atong community. That makes it holistic then in the umbrella or the house of integrated sustainable development. Now, unsang basic nga atong lantawon ani no sa Brundtland Commission, ningon siya needs. So unsa man si needs, atong i-define mo ng baseline. So ang baseline daw sa needs is the essential needs of the poor. Unsa din ang panginahanglanon sa tao nga pobre? Mo na ang pinaka-baseline nato, pinaka-floor, no? So ang pobre nga tao daw kailangan og balay, kailangan og healthcare, kailangan og trabaho, kailangan og pagkaon. So these are the basic things that we call needs. Everything above that one becomes consumption in sense, no? So there we have to control that one. It doesn't become, it will then become a want. No, want is not equivalent to needs. Needs is essential, want is more than the essential. It's already a extravagance in sense. Now, what is the limitations then? Because ingon man ta without compromising. So limitations is and the imposed by the city, by the state, by the government in terms of technology and social organization. Karon nga times we are using so much of technology and the modern applications of systems which are really not natural, no? These are already man-made. So we use this, but we do so in a way na it will not jeopardize future generation just because mo siya ang atong trend karon. Say for example, the use of cell phones, no? Pag madaot ang cellphones, siya paingon, ilabay sa basurahan. So this is part of our technology now, but we know fully that if it's a waste, where will this waste go? No, if billions of people in the world will have equal opportunity to buy a cell phone, so when madaot ang sa cell phone, we made new ones, and then the old ones are junk. So kung gi-junk siya, asa siya paingon? These are what we call as looking at least the limitations of what we have now, so that we will address the issue now, and that the future generation will not be compromised because of what we have now as a benefit becomes their problem in the future. Okay. So sustainability then is an interlocking idea of the three pillars: social, economic, environment. And from these three pillars, baga sa Venn diagram, na siya commonality of interlinks, no? Social and environment, na siya aspect of saying, kailangan bearable siya, kaya ra. Environment and economic, viable, pwede, no? And then social and economic, equitable, balance sa tanan, walay bias. And then overarching ang tanan is the word we have is sustainable. Sustainable because it's bearable, it's equitable, and it's viable for all. In social, environment, and economic pillars of the sustainability house. Okay. Now, sa atong engineering application, this is where we come in, because if you look at the interlocking sphere of the pillars of sustainability, economic, social, and environment, we have now what we call as economic growth, environmental stewardship, and social progress. Economic growth, meaning to say, ang atong ekonomiya sa usa ka community will be moving or advancing forward to become a better community with better stable economy. But then if we look at it, ang katapat-an na sa economic growth is the fact that we do so much technology and innovation. And then there are things to be looked at in terms of risk management. You know, the risk of spending so much, the risk of developing so much, the risk of innovating and using technology so much. What's the risk out? Risk din ha. Ang risk ba is para sa cellphone? This is innovation and technology. Ang risk is if this is done, what happens to this? Is it thrown away in the garbage? Is it thrown away in the landfill and then to the open sea or ocean, which will become an issue to our environment? So that's the risk. The other one is margin of improvement. So if we know fully that this is something that will destroy the future generations' protection for the environment, what is our mode for improvement? What will be our new cell phone in the future so that it will not harm our environment? That's margin for improvement and growth enhancement. We know fully that sa ato mga young generation, gamit kay ang cellphone because this is their technology. This is their worth, no? Gamit kay sa ilaha because they're into this new systems of doing things, of learning, of communicating, etc. This is their growth. But this kind of growth may be good for them now, but in the future generation, it's not. So what can be done here? What could we do to improve that kind of application? So this is really engineering. So the other side of things in environmental stewardship is we are stewards of our environment. We are actually responsible of our environment. So we are responsible nga naatay clean air, naatay clean water of land, that we are responsible to clean our air in terms of emissions and pollution. So we have to have emission reduction. And then we know fully that when it comes to waste, solid and liquid waste, we know fully that we should be able to zero our waste so that we do not throw it in the landfill or in the backyard of our neighboring Asian countries who are poor. We do not release pollution or accidentally make oil spills in the water of the open sea, that at the end of the line, these release and spills will harm our ecosystem in the open waters, no? Or maybe the releases can jeopardize our flora and fauna na species in land and water. The other side is really not engineering anymore, it's the social progress. Social progress is more onto diversity, human rights, community outreach, and labor relations. So this is more social science and for School of Business and Management. Because diversity is when we talk about people who are really diverse na in the community. In Cagayan de Oro, for example, sa una, ang napuyo sa Cagayan is mga lumad sa Cagayan. So we know fully our neighbors, kaila ko sa akong silingan sa barangay because gamay ramang barangay sa una, 1 to 40 raman. And then, kung magsakay sa jeep, kaila ko sa akong kasakay, ako din silingan, so ako siyang pritihan. No? Ako na priti, something like that. That's our culture of being very amiable Filipinos, no? And yet, over time, kaya na may mix and diverse na ang tao sa Cagayan. So we have people coming in from Lanao, from Davao, from Bukidnon, from Surigao, all coming into Cagayan. And this time, they are not lumad of Cagayan. We do not know them, but they're part of our community. So when I take a taxi or a jeep or a motorella, I do not know my neighbor, nako kaila sa ila, but I respect them and I kind of know them by regularly sitting on a jeep. Kaila ko sa akong kasakay, silingan man ako, niyo taga didto ra man sa unahan. But we don't know them fully. And yet, because rich ang atong diversity and lain-lain atong mga tao nga nag-abot karon, we know fully na collectively as people, we have the same needs, we have the same aspiration, so we respect them. And then in terms of human rights, we do not create bias in terms of gender, in terms of social rank and position. We do not create bias in terms of their work or ang ilang status sa work and status sa community. And we do community outreach, no? So regardless if dili siya lumad sa Cagayan during the pandemic, we are helping them in terms of provisions for medicines and food and shelter if there's a need during the time of COVID. So, kung ang barangay 1 sa Cagayan is given the support of the government in terms of rations of food or goods gikan sa relief sa COVID, it's also the same goods that is being given to the barangay 80 of Cagayan. So equal ang provision side. And of course, labor relations. So again, this is arts and sciences, but this is a part of the sustainability paradigm. And of course, later on, kaning sa right side, which is more sa atong area, these are the ones that we have more further application after midterms kay each sa inyong grupo will have opportunity to discuss different topics in relation to sustainability. So, this on the right, kani siya dinhi, ako lang i-highlight, is related to engineering, environment, and sustainable applications. No? So, dili siguro ta makaingon tanan, no? But really, for structural, for water, for transportation, for environment, and product development sa civil engineering, more or less naata dinhi nga area sa right side of the sustainability paradigm. Okay. So, unsa gali dayon ang sustainable goal that we mentioned ni Ma'am Annabelle? So, 17 ka sustainable goal. We start with no poverty and we end with partnership for the sustainable goal. That's number 17. And for the 17 sustainable goals of the United Nations and the UNESCO, we know fully that the overarching goal is really to look at the 5 P's nga atong focus ani nga mga goal. Ang focus ani nga mga goal is ang tao, people, ang prosperity sa tao, ang pagkalambo niya, ang kalinaw, peace sa mga tao nga ma-achieve through this goal, ang partnership nga ato pang ma-achieve through the 17 goals, and the protection of our environment or our planet. Okay. Now, sa ato sa nga side sa engineering, we are looking at sustainability index because if we talk about the social interlocking pillars and then the focus of the goal, we kind of know that these are science na side or arts na kaayo. So sa engineering, we look at unsa ang pwede nga taon-taon as criteria. So we have an index then to look at, Sustainability Society Index. One is for the well-being of humans or social, the well-being of the environment, and then the well-being of our economic development. So each of that is assigned to specific areas of application: basic needs, health, personal and social development under human. For environment, we have climate and energy and natural resources. For economic, we have transition or changes in the economy and the economy itself. So unsa dayon ang items na i-consider ani in terms of the index are actually 21 kabuok na item, no? So kamuna kung patanon karon sa civil engineering, asa aning 1 to 21 ang imong gitan-aw nga gamit kaayo sa atong application sa CE in terms of sustainability index? Anyone? Among sa 1 to 20, ha? Wala may wrong answer.
Consumption, ma'am.
Yak. Asa na nga number?
Sa number 12, ma'am.
Number 12, consumption. Because sa civil engineering, we use so much of raw materials sa atong pag-build of something. And byproducts of raw material, like steel, is byproduct of raw material, no? We use steel for our beams, all parts of our structural members sa building or sa atong kanang horizontal structures like bridges, no? Like flyovers and roads and highways or something like that. Yes, thank you. It's consumption. Next.
Energy use, ma'am. Number 13.
Very good. Indirectly, dili nato na ma-appreciate civil kaya abi nato ang energy is really for EE or ME. No, that's not true. Energy is utilized by all. Tanan nato trabaho sa civil engineering requires energy. Even the laptop that I'm using now to do the lesson for you, our design application is utilize energy. We cannot design manually, no? Nagagamit na matag software, gagamit ng machinery. So everything is related to energy. magpalit kag jackhammer para sa road construction, pero walay kuryente, di na magamit ang jackhammer, no? So everything is related to energy use. Thank you. Sa pa. Anyone else? Wala na?
Sa population growth, ma'am.
Ha? Come again, number 19. Kaduha na gid ni ganina sad sa ulto. Ganabuntag, sorry. GDP, no? Gross Domestic Product. Everything that we use in the house, at home, or even sa atong mga business or construction application is related to gross domestic product. Domestic product is related to kwarta gina siya, no? So wala tayong mahimo nga construction kung walay budget. Wala tayong mahimo engineering works or planning or programming kung walay kwarta, no? Kaya everybody needs money, and that's related to gross domestic product, so that we can at least produce something, we can work on something, we can build something. Other than that, napa?
Sufficient ay kuan ma'am kana income distribution ma'am.
Asa to, number 7?
7 ma'am.
Kanina sa muntag, ang gihatag ani nga example, employment. It's the same, no, concept. Kanang 20 o kanang income distribution 7. It's almost the same. It's related to money, but employment is hiring people for the works that we have sa civil engineering. But income distribution is also related to that because atong community has an equal measure of understanding the utilization of money or finances, no? So income distribution is related to for example, sa Cagayan de Oro, when we have a budget sa atong city, the distribution of our income sa local government is divided between sa needs sa tao, sa needs sa atong infrastructure, the needs for the social and welfare of our community. So income distribution is really related to budget as well. Para itong kaganina nga gross domestic product. But when it comes to income for human development, it's really basic sa human need, no? Katong ganina sa gross domestic product is ang income sa Cagayan as a whole. So, but then again, ang basic ana is human well-being. So income is also related sa atong labor force. When we hire people for work, that's related to income distribution. So kung engineer ka sa construction, dili pwede nga ang engineer gamay og sweldo compared sa iyang trabahante. Bisan pa og katong imong trabahante is skilled laborer, no? Or artisan siya, because it should be equitable po nga nag-eskwela ba ya kag tarong nga siya wa ba siya nag-eskwela, learned lang siya or skilled lang siya. So there should be an equitable distribution or understanding of income and salary, no, in that sense. Okay na or napay madugang? One last more. Anyone else?
Employment, ma'am.
Ha?
20, employment.
Employment. Thank you, Kayo. So everyone, we know fully that in able to sustain a community, we should have at least diverse employment. Naiuban sa ato teacher, naiuban sa ato mag-engineer, naiuban sa ato mag-designer, naiuban sa ato mag-consultant. So employment actually moves the economy of a community. Without such, we do not have people who buy goods. We don't have seller of goods, then we don't have also people who will provide the goods because wala may income. So employment is generated from the income that people have in the community and their capacity and their power to buy and to sell, something like that. So akong best good example ani is sa Africa. My classmate then sa Japan was from Zimbabwe. So I asked him, nganong ga save siya kwarta sa Japan kay kuripot kay siya sa naman mi scholars mami so nami how to say hindi siya sweldo, no, but more or ay sorry kisa by scholar din ano sa by term natuan na kung natay kwarta makuha. Murag stipend, no? So sige, thank you kayo. Sa amo dito
Like
sa
allowance, ma'am.
yeah, nami allowance or stipend every month for us to live off in Japan, no? Even if student ni, among stipend or among allowance is really equal to sweldo sa tao. Okay. Kasi we are paid to study. So tingnan ako, anong kuripot siya? Na-realize na ako because ang iya ding kwarta, which we have from Japan, is actually yen. Yen is equitable ang yen to dollar. Kaya ang power sa yen, although gamay siya value compared sa dollar, pero dako kay siya power to buy. It's basic na siya sa currency. Ayaw na lang ko pang tanabat. You can understand that better if you talk about currency. So then I asked him, ano siyang save of money? And he mentioned to me na, because in Japan, when you buy something, it's bulk, dagko. Sa ila, it's item. So if he will bring off her 100, let's say 10,000 yen or 10,000 yen of his money or 50,000 yen of money, padala niya sa Zimbabwe, dako na kay nga kwarta para makapalit og an item. Say for example, ang ila ding currency will have to be ingon siya murag 10,000 peso or 10,000 Zimbabwe nga kwarta currency can buy one loaf of bread. O ha? Nganong 10,000 man isa ka loaf of bread? Grabe kayo, 10,000 isa ka loaf of bread. Tsaka inana kamahal sa ila ang magpalit og isa ka item. And understanding that it's related to the power of money of a country or the power of currency of a country, no? So, and that's the reason na realize na ako nga importante sa iyang makatrabaho sa Japan compared makatrabaho sa iyang country. The same way nga ang Filipino would try to work abroad compared sa mag-work sa Philippines. Kaya kung naka sa lower category of employment, you don't have that salary that you really want to have the pleasure or the comfort of buying something. So, something. But sunungutan na siya sa ako, unsa ang Filipino currency? So, gamay man ang peso sa dollar, but dili inana ka-extreme sa inyo ang isa ka loaf of bread will take us 10,000. Siya pila ra din yung loaf sa bread? Iko nga, ang loaf sa mong bread, kaya naman sa mga 10 pesos, 20. Gamay, i-define na to. Gamay, medium, large, or isa ka dako nga loaf ng American size, it's different. But of course, dili na mo abot og 10,000 uy nga peso just to buy one slice or loaf of bread. So, so rich din yung country, ana, din ko nga di man mi rich, but at least we are rich in resources enough na among tao can eat what we find as something a pleasure. Dili parehas sa ilaha sa Zimbabwe when eating in itself, their basic needs is an issue, no? Makakaon kag tarong is really an issue with respect to money. So it boils down to employment. So that's the reason why it's not dili siya equitable ang resources. Kasi ganina di man into consumption, production, and what's the other one? Distribution. Because some countries across the globe really suffers from unequitable resource, no? Ilang country walay agriculture. Kita rich kay ta og environment, rich kay tag agriculture, and yet we're converting our land for real estate. That's an issue. And civil engineers are forefront runners of that. Sige, tag build. Ang realization is, wala ka, nag-engineer ka para i-destroy nimo ang environment. So that's the challenge for you, no? As future civil engineers, we look at how we will preserve our land despite the fact that we also did shelters. Okay. So, ganina we define sustainability, and now we will define environment because atong environment comprise the urban item. So the urban sa atong sustainable urban engineering is actually the topic now. So when we talk about urban development, we talk about urban communities, and urban community starts with what we call as environment, defined as natural and built, no? So ang sustainable environment or communities and unsustainable communities are also defined by the landscape of the area or the environment of the community. So, kung sustainable atong suryahon, it would mean nga na planned pagtarong ang pag-use sa area or sa space. Unsustainable is wala na planned pagtarong ang pag-use sa area of space. Example, in sustainable environment, we make sure that the shelter and housing of people are placed in an area where they can really have a good neighborhood and an area where they are safe from all forms of climatic conditions, no? And then, of course, we place a sustainable land community ang area for our preservations of forests, vegetations, and agriculture so that naay food para sa mga tao in the residential area and naay provisions para sa atong environmental health and well-being sa atong community, sa atong natural environment. And on the other side of that, we make sure nga katong mga essential needs sa tao, sa community, which is related to institutions such as schools, hospitals, church, government, are also placed in another area so that kani sila directed area and dili mix atong atong sheltered community. So in that way, if we have a need, we have road networks provided for the areas of residentials, and then we have directed area or main roads para sa atong mga area nga naka-zone for institution. That makes it sustainable and planned communities. Now, unsa ang unsustainable? Unsustainable is naay part sa atong agriculture na destroyed because we have to build houses and aggregated, o some areas are housing, some areas are agriculture, and then gubot kay ang setup sa atong community. Daghan din kay tag roads gihimo because nakita nato nga hala wa man nato na plan atong community, na build lang siya over time. Nasabtan ko ninyo?
Yes, ma'am.
So the need to preserve ato dayng vegetation is compromised kay man nato gi-plan atong community na compromise, wala na vegetative area, wala na area for our environment, na destroy na nato ang atong landscape because we just really sparsely plan things when there's a need. Mo nanggiyon ako sa Cagayan sa una nga maghimo lagi tag dalan just because na commercial center. Wala ta naghimog dalan kay nag-anticipate ta asa ang mga commercial, industrial, and manufacturing areas. We should plan out things so that atong future na ay roadmap, no? Dili kay just because na initubo nga 5-story hotel, 5-story or 10-story nga condominium, ay pa ta mag-build og dalan o ma-destroy na nato atong landscape. That is wrong. We have to take note that our environment starts with natural environment. So natural environment has also the ecosystem underwater and on land. It comprises flora and fauna, ang plants and animals, and atong environment is comprising different environments, no? So we have different environments, tundra, marine, desert, savanna, grassland, and atong country along Asia falls in the category of the tropical and rainforest, no, nga environment. So tropical because we are near to the equator, and some of our neighbors or atong neighbors sa Asia is also tropical. And some parts of Latin America is rainforest because they're not tropical but more so rainforest environment. So typically the same kaayo siya halos. We have only 2 seasons, dry and wet. So that's for tropical and rainforest environment. So when we talk about this, ang atong flora and fauna and ecosystem sa atong environment tropical is very unique, no? Dili nimo pwede ibalhin ang usa ka orchid nga plant sa usa ka country nga layo kayo and then expect that orchids to grow. Wrong. That orchid survive or maybe is endangered because the overuse na kay siya sa human, can only be planted, can only propagate in this area. In this same manner, we are saying that our environment in the Philippines can only grow certain crops of food for our people because this food and this crop is only good for tropical environment. So that's the reason when we put in place agriculture, we do not plant berries or strawberries just because we want to. Maybe to some area, yes, but it's not true for all parts of the Philippines. What we can grow in all parts of the Philippines is pechay, ampalaya, those crops, no? It's it's endemic to lugar sa atong area. Endemic, like the acacia tree is endemic to the Philippines. But if you put in place pine tree here, it's very not endemic. It can only grow in Baguio or some parts which are more adaptable to its environment na cold. Okay. So, atong natural environment, if atong tantawon, is very important because it will sustain our people in terms of health and well-being. Kung unsa gali ang nasa atong surroundings will be our also benefit sa atong nga tao nga nagpuyo sa environment. And because of that, we have to sustain our natural environment. So if you look at our environment then, environment from the natural environment will then be changing over time to become built environment. But before siya mag-jump start to the built environment, we have to look at individuals in the community. Individuals comprise people, ako, ikaw, and individuals have certain needs, no, characteristics natin, age, gender, lifestyle, culture, financial activity, financial income, and we have work, life activities, we have also our values. So that's for the individual. Na kung ang isa ka individual will have a family, then lahi po ang iyahang setup of needs. And then ang family which will be comprised with other family will become neighbors, they will also become a lump of people who has certain social needs, networks, healthcare needs, and so forth. And that becomes a community. Communities built over time becomes a built environment. So community nga nasa barangay 1, nagpuyo sa barangay 2, neighbor sila. Pag over time, daghan na kay sila barangay, they become a whole big community of people. And that becomes Cagayan de Oro City, for example. That becomes a built environment. So kung built environment ka, nanadayon tayo classification sa built environment. Rural, suburban, and urban. So Cagayan falls in urban community. So nana siya landscape. Landscape is a city, part of Region 10, and then part of the nation of the Philippines. Nana siya street and route network, nana siya buildings and spaces, places, and transportation system. And more so, if you look at it in perspective, ang built environment is not just the environment of people living in the urban area, but also people who needs the technology and the communication line and all products and services that will be provided for the people's comfort and welfare. Okay. So built over time, this environment includes the city of London is an example of built environment in Britain or the UK. We have the city of Tokyo, which is part of the environment of city of Japan. The city of New York, which is part of the environment of Manhattan and the United States. The city of Dubai, which is part of the Arab Emirates. The city of Hong Kong, which is also a country. No? And then we have Sydney, which is part of Australia. As you can see, the development here is becoming vertical. Why? Because people are populated in a given area with high and maybe middle density numbers of people residing in a compact area and space. The vertical structures are the support system for shelter of people. Kadili naman ma-afford nga horizontal ang imong development. So you go up, no? Vertical diet. Okay. So if we characterize built environment, then let's start with community classification. So A, community classification involves rural area and then suburban, urban communities, and metropolis. These are the main classification. So Philippines, we are defining rural and urban into a category lang, no? So the first one is, it's a rural kung baryo ang pagtawag, province ang pagtawag, municipality, town, and villages. Now, urban, kung itawag na to siya barangay, or maybe ward, or district. And then, sorry ha, sa one country, ang district is called as ward. And then, ang pinaka-basic sa district is actually the barangay. And then, of course, ang urban community is also comprising suburban areas before sa sentro. Suburban is ang gawa sa sentro, ang urban nga main is katuna sa sentro, but it's part of the entire urban city or metropolis. So the highest of that is metropolis, and Cagayan de Oro City is a part now of Metro Cagayan metropolitan area. By 2025 ang target. So we're gearing forward to that. We're still now 2021, so we have 4 years in the making towards Metro Cagayan de Oro. Okay, so ang second na characteristics of built environment is ang yung land use and zoning. So kung nato sa planning side, because civil engineering is also into planning, so planning sa DP, sa city engineering, and all engineering applications sa civil is really into planning. So planning for land and zoning of an area is defined by 4 categories of zoning: functional, form-based, intensity, and incentive. So ang functional is based on pag-aggregate, pag-group nimo sa area based on function. So sa function, it will be like na ay area nga gitawag nato dinhi ang mga commercial, dinhi ang mga industrial, dinhi ang green space, dinhi ang mga residential and administrative. So kung na-color, it will mean nga atong Cagayan de Oro is divided by areas nga naa dito ang commercial, naa dinhi ang administration, naa dinhi ang residential, industrial, and green space. That is true 20 years ago. Inana pag-divide ang Cagayan sa una 20 years ago. Over time, from functional zoning, we are now form-based, no? So unsa ang identity sa form-based? Ang form-based is defined by the landscape or the boundary of the area. So this time, di na siya related sa function. It's more like yung physical identity. So natay gitawag og downtown and uptown. Yeah, klaro kay na, no? Everything lower to Cagayan by terrain is downtown, and ang uptown is katong nasa uptown area is actually katong muagi sa Masterson and going up, no? Okay. So there's an uptown and downtown na karon. And Cagayan is defined by the demarcation of the river that separates the east and west side of the city. So ang east is ang District 1, ang east is ang District 2, ang west is the District 1. So we have now 2 districts, and we have also uptown, downtown na classification. And then of course we have historical district, o the dili kay siya dako nga district, no? Sa Cagayan, we have Divisoria as historical landmark, no? Mao na ang pinaka-park sa atong city. Ang historical landmark sa Cagayan is ang Divisoria Park. So that's our historical district in sense. Sa ubang country, nasa historical district kay tuwa dito ang mga temple, tuwa dito ang mga karaan kay nila nga historical land sites. Sa Japan, for example, they have the Emperor's Garden or the Emperor's Castle, and this area are enclosed because it's historical district, gina-preserve nila. Sa Cagayan, wala man taan na Pernatay, Divisoria Park. And then of course, naitang gitawag og manufacturing district. So sa Cagayan, dili kay na nato maklaro, but for your information, ang ato manufacturing district is along the coastal road, no? Tuwa dito ang mga food industry, ang mga production industry, ang mga metalworks industry, ang mga oil industry, sa lumber. Oh. So, kung makita ninyo along the coastal road, na diha ang Nestle, ang Del Monte, beer na beer, sa soft drinks, mga planta sa oil and crops, because it's directed to the main highway para sa distribution of the market. So once na-produce nilang product, ila din ang spread out across the Mindanao area. And then ang ilang baseline is Cagayan de Oro. So kung babantayan na ninyo, then you can really check on this. The coastal side or the Bay Area of Cagayan actually has these factories and industries. Okay. So that's more or less the form base that we have now. Kaysa una, functional naman ta. Mingon ang city planning office nga dili ka pwede magbutang din og ka ng petroleum depot because that's residential area. Dili ka pwede din magbutang og kanang eskwelahan kay that's actually forest preserved area, green space. So that's functional sa una. Nakaroon na change na atong landscape kay daghan naman ang tao, so they become form based, no? Naklaro na nga this is downtown, uptown, this is east and west district na siya. And then over time na napud tay ginatawag og preserved area. Okay, this is very recent, no? Nangutana ko ani I think mga 3 or 4 years ago, nangutana ko sa city office of the building official nganong ilang inspection sa building is divided by district. Inko nga unsa man di ang district 1 dinhi nga side sa Carmen, ang district 2 dinhi nga side pa ingon Bugo. Anong ginana man kung ana din sila sa kuan kay i-divide na daw ang Cagayan by the river itself. Okay, so medyo nasabtan na nako nga inana di ang pag-divide sa Cagayan. And then later on, gi-divide pagid siya sa downtown area and uptown during Sendong. Okay? In a way sa Sendong, gina-classify nga katuna sa downtown is flood prone and katuna sa uptown is the area where residential shelter should be made to protect people from flood. So, mo na nga develop ang uptown area. Now, unsang intensity zoning? Intensity zoning is based on the density of people residing in an area. So this is more like an classification sa mga countries nga na ay capital cities like New York, Tokyo, Manila, our capital. These are the ones that are defining the cities because gubot naman yung landform, di na siya ma-define by functional or form-based. What they have instead is based on density, sa kadaghan ang tao. So na high density area, average density area, low density area, and no development area. So for example, sa Manila, some no development areas is mga forest area nga nabilin sa Manila or mga parks, and no development also dapit sa coastal. But the rest of that is actually divided na sa high, average, and low density. So high kung na mga vertical structures, average kung na ay mix of vertical and horizontal, and then ang low density is all horizontal siya tanan nga area. So for example, Makati area is actually defined as high density. Low density maybe is Quezon City, which are more residential area, and average density area is, so my average examples, average is Pasay area. No, Pasay already has the mall, so maybe, how to say, average density. Tondo area is average density area. Okay ka na. O and then din sa Philippines, wala kay ta incentive zoning, no? Ang akong example lang sa incentive zoning kay dili naman existing karon is the one that we have sa Subic area, which is before is US military base. So incentive zoning because if you notice na sila mga privileges because it's a US based area. It's in Olongapo City. But now wala naman na siya sa ato. Wala na demarcation kay it's open to all naman ang Subic Bay area. But then, for example, in Netherlands, what they have is incentive zoning. Na sila area of cities gid siya ha, cities which are for tourism and cities for industrial and manufacturing. So, katong mga cities nga for tourism, gina-preserve siya sa government and na siya incentive because tagaan siya opportunity to improve the environment in terms of culture, heritage, environment. And for example, gina-maintain ilang mga villages, gina-maintain ilang museum, gina-maintain ang ilang mga parks, gina-maintain ang ilang mga natural environment, making and ensuring people are happy, living in a village concept. Bisan pag nag-advance na ang world, village lang yapon ilang concept because they're trying to maintain tourism industry. So ang mga tourists, pag mga dito, mura gyapon siya the usual culture nila sa mga Dutch na this is a community which is really Dutch, no? But that is preserved for tourism purpose only. So ang ilang incentive is really tourism driven nga development. On the other side, na ay city sa Netherlands which is really manufacturing and industrial. So kani nga city you expect people are really working for an industrial site, an office, industry, no? And manufacturing in application. So ang mga housing dito is vertical para lang sa mga workforce. And ang ilahang access is train or bus para makaadto sa trabaho, then makauli sa ilahang immediate residence. But ilang environment, walay aesthetic nga beauty. Okay? Work raman siya related. So it's more on offices, vertical, halos tanan. So that's a city which is driven by the provisions of a certain degree of of application. And ang iyang incentive is ang iyang incentive of ensuring people are working in that area. You are given housing provision because you are a worker in that area. Pag dili ka worker, dili ka tagaan sa reward to stay in that area because an apartment and a housing there is only for workers. So that's how they group the incentive zoning of a given area. Questions so far? Wala?
None so
Wala?
far, ma'am.
Okay, so the other built environment characteristics is based on dimensions and elements. And I think na-discuss na nako ni sa transportation. No? When we have land use of an area, we have cities based on barangays and the people residing in the area. But the people here are also moving on mobility, exchange, and activities. So the relationship then is related to people commuting, people moving, maybe professional need to move or personal need to move, and there's a distribution. So distribution is based on the activities. Kung core ng activity is essential na siya sa akuan, mag-shop ko para sa pagkaon sa balay or mag-deliver ko para sa akong negosyo. That's core activity. Central activity is maybe defined by the usual activity of people, no? The usual is mag-adto ko sa work, mag-eskwela ko, mag-adto ko sa office, no? So that's central activity. And peripheral activities are related to mga extra and special activity like mag-travel, magbisita o kaila. Those are moving outside, maybe more directed purpose, no? And so from the central area, imong barangay, imong center, o gikan sa imong balay, now you are to move, and movement requires a degree of infrastructure development. Either because ikaw ang passenger or ikaw ang driver, or maybe because ikaw ang naghatod sa freight or services, maybe ga-deliver kag something, no? From balay to an office nga imuhang kliyente, or maybe because you are part of a company that delivers some services or goods. So the dimension and elements are now defined by dimension and element. We have land use patterns, urban design characteristics, and transportation system. Sa land use, it's either imuhang form sa land patterns is mixed or based on density of people. And then sa urban design can be either urban by street networks or urban based on sites or area. No? And then you have transportation systems because its systems could be road network, transportation motorized and non-motorized, or public and private applications. So over time, because that dimension and element gikan kaganina is driven by certain mobility of people and their activities, then you have the urban forms. Mapurma na din ang city. Mapurma siya because mag-create matag access road para sa iyang activity. So nananay tayo road network, no, nga buhat. And then sa road network, nananay siya movement, kay spatial man ang dynamic man ang pag-serve sa activity sa tao. So it becomes spatial structure. So spatial structure will have connectivity and technology-driven or communication-driven. So magamit na tao ka ng traffic signal, magamit ta sa CCTV, so forth and so on for certain spatial application. And then of course, later on, kung makita na nimo sa pag-zoom out sa city, kita na nimo nga daghan naman day ko road network, daghan naman day ko zoning. So what we have then is an overall land use pattern sa city, no? Land use pattern because dinhi makita morning downtown, morning uptown, morning district 1, district 2, morning ang mga barangay, morning ang mga commercial and non-commercial area. So this is then how it looks like when we try to address the elements with respect to dimension. So because sa area needs connectivity in terms of access, so we have to define it from murag katong small nga roads towards a bigger highway. And then because access requires meeting of networks of convergence, so naatay mga areas nga dito mag-meet ang tao. Maybe ang meeting point is ang downtown area, kay dito ang government or ang building sa usa ka office of the hospital or whatnot. So becomes a convergence of people. Sometimes convergence of people is related to an area where people really meet. Maybe ang work area, ang space sa eskwelahan, ang space sa barrio hall, no? Ang space sa park is part of convergence. And then over time, kita na ni mo na form ang city, no? From the ones na walay form, eventually it will have a form. For example, karon I live near to Kanbituan, Kalaanan area. It's very simple community. Nalami small nga road, main highway, barangay road, and then nami convergence sa barangay area. Napoy eskwelahan, na convergence sa mga estudyante, na simbahan, convergence sa magsimba, no? Wala kayo may market. So ang among form of integration is gamay ra kayo based sa area. Gamay ra din raw market ra usually na may gamatoy nga market nga talipapa. Over time, tungod sa sendong, and then over time po, tungod sa naitabo sa pandemic, mura na may nainani because nanami kaugalingon nga health center, nanay kaugalingon nga market, or daghan mi small market, no? People can really go everywhere kay nanay convergence. And nanaming among simbahan kay isa ra man sa una karon kay tulo na ka simbahan, and so forth and so on. So over time, a lot of people coming in by population and changes with respect to the urban setup, ma-change po ang landscape sa usa ka community. So, built environment in terms of the character of dimension and elements is defined by a model of planned area. So we have concentric, sector model, and multiple nuclei model. So an example siguro sa akong transportation na discussion sa una kay concentric is the city of Rome is like concentric. The city of the capital of France or Paris is based on a concentric model. No? Na sentro, then outer anang area, even Tokyo is the same, no? Concentric na siya. Ang central business district, ang mga main offices nasa sentro, pagawas. Na over time, dili na natinuod from Borges nga 1925 nga planning setup of a city. No? Over time, kay mutaghan ang tao, makahuna-huna na dayon ang city to improve the landscape. No? So maybe dinhi nga side, daghan kay mga workforce, and then supportaan ng mga balay para sa workers na duol sa ila ang nilang area for shelter. And then sa sentro is what we have as the institution like hospital, healthcare, etc. and markets, something like that. And then natay high class area or middle class area, and then high class area for residential development. So that's sector model. So ang Cagayan sa una kay barangay 1 to 40 raman, namirata ang sentro is ang Divisoria. Yan ang mga balay na naadanha ang mga tindahan day supposedly. Naara sa mga Divisoria area ang mga tindahan nga na bookstore, na shop, naratanan niya sa Divisoria duol, ang pinaka-nearest nga hospital duol po sa Divisoria. Eventually, dili na natinuod kay nabungkag naman ang Cagayan. So we have already barangay 1 to 80. So na aggregate ang Cagayan. Now what we have is multiple nuclei model, no? We have areas which is now uptown, downtown. Sa uptown na siya commercial center o mga balay, sa downtown na commercial center balay, and ang mga balay sa una na convert na into institutions ng uban. So these are the changes over time. It works because siguro when Japan, Tokyo was made like this, or Paris, now it becomes a sector model over time because of people. And now, parehas sa Singapore, the model of a city in Singapore is really mixed, no? Multiple nuclear model. So what happens in a multiple nuclear model is self-sufficient siya because ang sa condominium or building sa ubos na market, na siya clinic, na gamay, na siya services para ma-provide sa isa ka condo. And then na siya silingan nga condo gyapon so they can meet halfway kay anyang condo nga silingan na pud sila market nga gamay, na health clinic centers na. So this community are independent to each other. Pwede pa gyapon mawala nga naa sila central business district nga area. So napud siya gyapon center para sa ilahang institution, napud center para sa ilahang immediate need for commerce. But certainly sa ilahang mga buildings mura siyang township, na gamay nga town, town, and then collectively they have a center which is the main CBD area of the city. So that's dimension and elements na example. Okay. So this is an example of dimensions and elements when we talk about scale, no, ang kadakon sa area and ang iyang boundaries or what we call as abstraction. So this is an example of the city of Tokyo. So let's talk about this as like city of Cagayan de Oro, no? Kung zoom out nato siya, it's Tokyo City or Cagayan. But kung i-zoom in nato siya, na ay duha ka district. No, ang sa Tokyo na siya Sumida, and then ward, and then we have North Sumida ward. So duha ka district. Sa Cagayan, we have District 1 and District 2. Now, if you look at letter D is a neighborhood of a district. Now, for example, sa neighborhood sa Cagayan, we have Downtown Divisoria, comprises, I think, 5 barangays, no? Silingan ng mga barangay. So that's a small district, and small neighborhood of Divisoria area. And it's similar to Makasandig area, which is really residential, and the neighborhood is Makasandig people living in an area. And that development of Makasandig or Divisoria has actually space allocation based on boundary, no? Na siya yung mga road networks for access, mga small roads and main road. But if you look at it, zooming in, from the block systems of the road, you will actually have the buildings or the housing, no, or the units of every community shelter. So over time, if you look at it, it's like when you build a city, from zooming into a special unit, which is buildings, down to having networks and blocks, to a neighborhood, to a district or ward area, becoming one whole big city. That's actually scales of abstraction. Okay. So in that sense, ang scale of abstraction, at the same time, ang model na gi-create in terms of planning an area is a system of urban application. So we call it holarchy. It's not circle, it's actually more concentric area. So we call it holons. The holons is based on the main proportions, which is actually the proportions of the created buildings, the created transportation networks and system, the needed infrastructure, and then sa information includes technology, information, and communication lines. So para sa usa ka body sa tao, ang physical body is actually the buildings or the cells. And then ang transportation is the periphery of all the veins and then parts of body which requires the flow of the system. And infrastructure is ang bone, no? Ang bone is the mainframe of a body, a mainframe of a city. That's the infrastructure. And then ang other parts of that, ang information, communication, and technology is actually the nerves of the system. So it becomes a four pillars in sense because it comprises the community level of design for a fundamental unit, which is an individual to a family to a community. So kung basic unit of the community is actually an individual defined by individual living in a household, after that one, sa isa ka unit of measure becomes the buildings, kung napuyo sila sa isa ka balay or isa ka condominium or isa ka real estate area. And then isa ka block because ang ilahang area, kung sila yung mga neighbors, needs roads and networks of road, it becomes blocks or junctions of streets, then becomes neighbors or super block of junctions and streets, becoming the city. Okay, so balik ko na itong definition sa sustainability then. The sustainability application is based on the 3 pillars of our need, which is social, environmental, and economic. And it is based on the foundation, which is the good governance and financing of our services. So, suma total, when we talk about sustainable city starts from individual, ganina, no? Individual sa katao, living in a given unit, which is a family comprising residence or real estate area, or maybe building because condo ilagipuyan. And then these people living in a given area becomes a neighborhood of people. And then a lot of people in the neighborhood creating community, and communities creating cities, and cities created over time as metropolitan center, becoming a regional center, and maybe a megalopolis. Now, sa Philippines, we do not have megalopolis. We only have regions, no? But we are divided by our islands, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. So what is needed by the individual is cascaded to the regional application from start to the bigger area. To make it sustainable city, we at least provide shelter, communication line, roads and networks of access, provisions of goods and services, essential needs of people, shelter, food, and whatnot. So these are essential, no? So sa gamay pang kailangan panginahanglanon magkadako. So sa building, for example, mabutang na tag energy, water, kanang communication area kay wired naman and all. Paingon sa regional application, when we look at areas for development, mabutang taog bigger transportation networks such as airports and seaports. And when we give people more preservation for farmlands, for crops and food production, or commercial centers for economic development, and so forth and so on. So that's what we call a sustainable city because we're looking at one area of development to the higher area of development and preparing this para sa future sense of looking at what will happen in the future if population will increase over time and then our landscape will change over time. So when we build our urban systems then, we know fully that there are four applications now to look at, especially sa engineering side. We have infrastructure and built environment, we have natural environment, socio-economic, and governance. So, but then, dinhi sa atong kanino, sa atong pillars, kung atong lantawon sa four-leaf, no? Sa four-leaf, nata dinhi sa right side, no? Kani infrastructure and built environment for civil engineering. Governance is only for people who are working in government. Socio-economic is arts and sciences. Natural environment is for agriculture, etc. Sometimes we mix here, sometimes we mix here. No? Kung nagtrabaho ta sa government and ang atong trabaho is related to engineering, o kung nagtrabaho ta sa kanang protection of the environment, kung nagtrabaho ta sa DNR or sa kaning areas which have environmental applications, and then engineering atong field is related to forestry maybe or mining. No? So that's engineering, civil engineering application. So what's important here in the elements of the urban system is that we ensure that we provide for people, for the transportation network, energy, essential water, food, and air for people. So that's related to urban systems. And because kani siya nga system is subjected to shocks. Ang shocks, for example, is kanang mga impacts. No? So climate change has an impact. No? Flood, typhoon, landslide, earthquakes, those are the shocks. No? So sometimes kung wala na mo gi-prepare ang atong engineering and infrastructure for built environment, naatay failure sa atong system. No? Kajit lang tayo. Hello? Yes? Nag-message na ko ganina, wala ko karon ugma ka. Okay, sige, salamat. Bye-bye. Okay. So, ang may tabo din ani is that if dili na to i-prepare ang atong infrastructure and built environment, subjected ta sa failure sa atong system. To be a very good engineer is to make sure that we are very aware of what is happening in our environment so that we create or we design infrastructures and our built environment to become resilient, no? So maybe dili kayo sa material or sa design, but more on the measures maybe. So we make resilient measures in adaptation to something that might happen. Adaptation is duha na aspect. Mag-adapt ka kay nakita nimo maayo siya, so i-adapt nimo. Or adaptation kay mao na ning nahitabo, we have to adjust, no? So that's adapt nga ADO o adapt nga ADA, no? That's a different spelling. So I'm talking about adaptation, ADAPTATION. So adaptation would mean because mao na ning scenario sa atong environment, we have to be flexible, we have to create redundancy, we have to be resourceful, we have to be very careful with safety, and we look at failures and then troubleshoot that failures to make our system safe. We have to be inclusive, so walay bias para sa tanan ang atong tumong, no? We become responsive and responsible sa needs sa atong community. We also are able to adapt to any learnings, no? So that makapacitate ta as a people kung what will happen kung naibaha, what will we do? So we ask information from other people who experience the same scenario, and then we adapt. Okay? And then interdependence. So we are not just dependent on our own, we seek help. We also help others. So that's interdependency. So realizing this, our response and strategy to resilient measures for engineering is related to persistence, transition, and transformation. Persistence kay atong yung paningkamutan mahimuag maagi. Transition is ang pamaagi atong himuon nga maghinay-hinay, mag-transform atong community. Transition is not change over time, no? It's changing slowly over time. Dili kay drastic change nga ang mga tao dili maka-adapt. Okay? And the transformation is the new understanding nga nang mag-build tag inani karon. It's for the future. For example, akong mahatag sa inyo sa resilient is ang Marcos Bridge, no? Marcos Bridge was not then built on more recent years. It's actually more than, I think, kula ko na sa'yo, 50 years na siya. It's Marcos Bridge when I was already aware that it's Marcos Bridge. So the ones who build that bridge are very resilient and very intelligent engineers when they come to design. Because when Sendong happened, that's the only bridge that survives amongst the recent bridges being made. No? Maybe ang cathedral was overflowed, na overflooded because low in ang elevation. But then these two old bridge are very resilient in their application. No? So we appreciate our profession when we kind of understand the implication of our profession in terms of application. Not just because we benefit kita nga nag-engineer ana, but because kabalutang ang tumong is para sa uban. Okay. So sa engineering, when we do built environment program setting, it's like engineering programming of things. So kung mag-engineering program ta, kabalutang mag-start ta sa planning, and then design, and after design, construction or building of something, and then operation and maintenance. Then evaluation maybe, then balik na sa planning, design, construction, operation and maintenance, evaluation, then planning, and so forth. So this is a cycle of engineering management of projects. Whether a project is a small balay or a road lang na segment, or maybe a huge building or a road network na huge infrastructure development. All of this has to be understood in the context nga we have a cycle of doing things in terms of program setting for engineering management, planning, design, construction, operation, maintenance, and evaluation. Okay. So, akong assignment for Thursday next week is that you kind of look at the videos entitled Creating Sustainable Cities and check on the materials on traits of sustainable city and sustainable cities around the world. So for these three, I hope you will be able to more or less enhance your understanding of sustainable urban engineering applications, particularly for cities. And then also, on the other hand, you can also discuss as a case review, one, the question on as a civil engineering student or students, kay triad man mo, no? Which among the UN SDG can you commit, no? Now and in the future? And why? So 17 man atong goal sa SDG. So unsay pwede nimo i-commit? And then now and in the future. So then why that yun? Okay? And number two, in line with this, para sa Cagayan, nga immediate community ninyo, kay mo man imong community karon. I'm not sure if asa mong paingon abroad, maybe next time, no? Or asang cities sa Philippines mo mag-reside. But for present condition, in line with your community and environment, what will be your future application? Sa imong gusto mahitabo based sa imong commitment. So what is your future application or applications to advance your commitment? And how will you promote this? Okay? So Pwede na siya isa ka answer para sa triad. Pwede po na siya tulo ka answer or duha ka answer para sa triad mo. So you discuss it amongst yourself kung sa inyong gusto nga ipahatod. Maybe it's personal, maybe it's collective na decision sa grupo. That's okay. Dili man kay siya brainer nga assignment. No? So is the instruction clear?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, sige. Ako lay hatod is that please place this on A4 nga Word file. Ang margin on all sides is 0.5, okay, para ma-optimize ang space. And then you will have kaning iyahang font type can be Calibri or Times New Roman. Ang font size is 10. Single space. And walay picture, please. Just discuss. I need to have your insights, not your copy-pasted photos and images. Okay ba na?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Okay, ma'am.
And you have your reference here to look at for the review of the topic today. Okay. Then I will have one last more as the backbone for your understanding of sustainable. I'll run through this one because it's almost 4, no? But it's very easier to handle because it's not really related to concepts and principle. It's just a background. But this will serve for the purpose para aware mo, dili mo ignorant to the law, to the law of the land. So this is presentation number 2. Kulang idiretso ha para makahumantag sa iyo. So this is still introduction to concept of sustainable urban engineering. So we'll discuss first our environment and our spots. So ang environment nato in terms of sustainable application is related to climate change. One, because ang natural system of the earth and the planet is that when we talk about the science of heat exchange, kabaluta nga the sun will actually create radiation to our earth, and everything in our earth grow and being produced or grows is because of the sun's and our benefits from the sun, but also because some of the light and radiation that we encounter are actually reflected balik outside sa earth so that the earth will not heat up. What happens then now is that we do not have that sustainable environment. As to unsustainable because what happens with human activities, ang ginahimo sa tao, human activities created the what we call as greenhouse effect. Greenhouse effect is by virtue of maybe greenhouse gas or carbon dioxide emissions or pollutions to the environment. The sense here is that the underlying principle of heat exchange will now have certain compromise system. Ang compromise system is that dili tanan ma-radiate sa sun ato ma-deflect, no? So the tendency is because ang cover layer sa earth nato is already compromised, and therefore some portions will have so much heat na di niya ma-deflect balik sa gawas. And it's all because of pollution in our atmosphere and the sublayers of our biosphere. So those unreflected heat are then absorbed by the earth, thereby creating a climate change impact to our environment. These are based on greenhouse gases, which are pollution to our environment. And most of these are actually because of the fossil fuels or byproducts of burning something, no? Burning from transportation, burning from industrial or manufacturing, burning from any forms of production, and burning even in the household, no? Sa mga balay. Mag-barbecue ta kay everywhere there is a barbecue station or a kanang grilled manok, no? Those are byproducts of burning. Construction for civil engineering, mag-welding, mag-capping, mag-produce of cement, mag-produce of metalworks, by smelting plants. Smelting is metal plants, metal manufacturing plants. These are byproducts of burning. So tanan yun, basta human activity, burning din ang essential para maka-produce of something. Even our very own food requires cooking and burning. Okay. And the other side of thinking, other side of looking at things also is that atong Earth emits heat in itself. Ang atong land will absorb heat from the sun and then will release that heat. So therefore, even our environment creates heat, no? And then of course, ang ato pong water environment creates heat in a sense. With seasonal variation, na siya mahimo nga heat. Again, ingon ko, kung balance lang ang system, kani nga heat ma-reflect na nato other than the fact na ang heat sa sun ma-absorb po nato. But then the other side of thing is kaning nasa tunga, no? Ang atong urban communities creates also what we call as heat waves or heat vacuums or heat columns, no? So columns, vacuums, or waves, no? Because ang mga buildings, material man na siya. So they absorb heat during the daytime and then sa evening, i-dissipate niya ang heat. So mabantayan ninyo during daytime, init kay ang gawas, murag cooler lang ang sulod. Kaya gina-absorb man sa material ang heat. And then of course, ang atong aircon kung sa sulod sa balay or building or atong mga conditioning, cooling system are here, no? Sa hapon, matingala dayon ka kay pag sundown, muinit ang building. Mo warmer siya sa mo. Because that's the time na ang temperature is no longer the same. Ang gawas is cooler, ang material is still dissipating heat, no? Iya pang ginapagawas ang heat sa material. So what happens is ang sulod sa balay, part of dissipating heat, kaya dito man siya mag-dissipate sa heat sa gawas, mag-dissipate po siya heat sa sulod. So all the more ma-feel ni mo ang contrast kay pamugawas ka sa balay, bugnaw, pero sa sulod sa balay, init or igang. And that's because of material, heat absorption, and heat exchange. Some countries will use thermal products that will deflect this heat. No? Na mga window materials for construction now that deflects heat so that it will not be absorbed inside the house or the home bisan if glass item siya. That's true kung material is made for that purpose. But then some materials do not have that quality and therefore we kind of absorb this heat. And over time, if a community or an urban environment has a lot of buildings, a lot of condominiums and structures, and some of these structures doesn't have that capability to deflect heat, in itself, buildings in urban area absorbs heat and in a circular manner, kay circular system man ang flow sa heat, it will create a heat wave in an area. My best example is when I then went outside of the country of the Philippines. For example, in some part of Singapore, Malaysia, and Japan, there are seasonal variations of heat, no? Init gyud ang ilang season kung moingon tag heat dry season pod. But the problem is because ang mga urban area is also igam kaayo kay tungod sa mga buildings, wala na yung mga area where there are plants and trees to cool the air. You kind of want to stay indoor kay para lang bugnaw imong paminaw. Dili ka ganan magsuroy o as a tourist over during daytime kay init kay ilang area. That's even cities, no? Main cities in some countries. And so the cooling time to get around if you are tourist is then during the afternoon or the evening kay mura may opportunity nga murag ang ilahang environment is adaptable for you. Sa Philippines, like if I go to Manila, that's the same principle na di ko ganahan magawas-gawas basta adlawan kay init kayo. But sa gabi it's nice because it's cooler. But in Cagayan, we do not do that. We can still go out and enjoy the rest of the day outside because we have trees, we have vegetative area, and kung naalang kay sakyanan and you open the window, you can still feel the air. Dili para sa muagi kag Pasig or EDSA, you cannot breathe a good air because it's already urban heat is surrounding you. So that's the same principle. Okay. So the impact of climate change over time with respect to unbalanced ecosystem, which is not sustainable, is that part of our sea level is going up. It's because some areas in the North Pole, the glaciers, the ice in the North Pole are melting. So those people living in the equator or the middle part of our Earth are suffering from flooding because sea level is rising. And then, of course, with pollution over time across the globe, pollution doesn't have boundaries, no? Ang hangin sa Germany can come into the Philippines. Ang hangin sa China, maabot sa Pilipinas, kay move man ang hangin. So kung ang pollution sa China is huge enough to cover entire Asia, nakita tanan sa entire Asia, mag-experience of pollution from a form of precipitation or rain. And one type of that is what we call as acid rain. Acid rain is not a good rain. It's a rain that is a byproduct of ozone pollutants in the water in the cloud system. And that's the reason mabantayan ninyo, acid rain is a very good determinant siguro sa acid rain is kung pirmi kulog. Kulog ang cloud formation. Magsige siya lightning and magsige siya kulog. Saan kulog sa taga Bisaya? Ang Bisaya sa kulog sa Tagalog is dalugdog sa Bisaya. Correct me if I'm wrong. Dalugdog. Kabalo mo sa kulog o dalugdog.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Oo. So kanang kidlat is lightning, ng kulog or dalugdog is ang sound. That one is a determinant of acid rain because it's related to electrons in the water which is in the cloud formation before siya mahimong rain. Sa una, when I was young, I do not hear so much kanang something like noise, na kulog o kidlat. No? But now you can really be aware of that. When it rains, sometimes grabe ang kidlat o kulog. It's a precursor of acid rains. No? And then, of course, other side of that is vegetative ecosystems of plant on land and water affected by climate change. Usana is na mga mananap, mamatay, or matanom nga dili makasurvive. When I was in the University of the Philippines before, sa Diliman, daghan kayo fireflies. Ang sama ng fireflies sa Bisaya. Kulitap-tap, bala sa Tagalog, fireflies. And ingon sila sa Tagalog is kung naa daw alitap-tap, dili kulitap-tap, alitap-tap, it would mean nga ang imong environment is very fresh ang air. Kay fireflies only thrive in environment na walay pollution. So asa man ang area, sa mga area nga forest and ay mga bamboos and na ay water, kay mo survive man na sila. But the moment it change nimo ng environment, walay mabilin ana nga fireflies, mamatay na sila. So insects die because of changes related to climate change. And of course, we experience solar radiation, and then diverse na atong genetic forms sa atong flora and fauna. Na yung mga plant species o animal nga mag-mutate over time, no? An example of that is katong when nuclear bomb fell sa sa Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Hiroshima na sila special plant nga ni survive no sa bombing sa Hiroshima. But this is mutated plant. I should say that because I've been there. Nakita na ako nga, ay, nani, di siya. So, ingon sila, dili na daw na mao ang genetic formation. So, if you look at it over time, any climate change impact actually change the genetic form of the ecosystem, be it for plants and animals or flora and fauna. And of course, we know fully because solar radiation is very entering the earth with so much heat. Now, what happens inside the earth is temperature change. So, atong country sa Philippines, mag-experience sa 32, 37 sa Tagigaraw, init na kayo nastanan. And more so, recently, for the last 3 to 4 months, what happens is some parts of Europe have climate change impact. The flood ang mga areas sa Europe like Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, and some parts of France. Why? Because these are impacts of climate change. And mura na sila giagi og sendo nga wala nila na-experience ever sa ilang lifetime. Some parts in Africa, which are really desert areas, are experiencing extreme heat, but at the same time, na ay rain, abnormal kay sa ilaha. And the same sa Philippines. No? Na-change na tong season. Okay, so these are impacts of the environment. Forest fire, which are natural spontaneous combustion in forest fire, are actually issues in the US and Australia and Indonesia for the last few months and few years. No? Desertification in Africa, typhoons and hurricanes, areas which have arid areas, karon nahimo na siya depleted with water, and then some parts are flooded with water. In some parts, because of temperature change, nagmelt, and then some parts have ecosystems like some fauna nila, mga animals are subjected to these changes, impacts of the environment. These are not true only for our region in Asia, it's across the globe, no? In fact, the problems are heat waves, severe droughts, extreme flooding, hurricanes, and tornadoes. And some parts of Australia, for example, tanaw ni mo, murag dili na kay sila naigo, no? But forest fire affected them. Coral reef are dying across Australia because of heat waves that create so much heat in the water. Ang tubig nga ininit sa balay, mura ng tubig sa ilang beaches, ilang mga beach area, so namatay ang mga corals. It's not only true in Australia, but it runs across Latin America and even Asia. Some of our corals in Camiguin and so forth nga nasa nearer to the surface of the water are actually dying because of heat on water. Food production is aggravated because some areas are experiencing so much heat, some areas are flooded. So ang atong crops are not the same as before. So I remembered, I think 5 years or 10 years ago na gipa-change ang crops sa Bukidnon from planting from planting fruit and vegetable crops, gipa-convert to watermelon, kalabasa or pumpkin, corn, and cassava para lang makasurvive sa heat and maka-yield of crop ang farmers because these are crops that can sustain drought, no? And then another issue is then population. No? Ganina akong discuss ang climate change issue. These issues are because of population explosion. So we are now in 2021, so we are expected to go up as high as 8 billion across the globe by 2024. And in 2061, we'll become 10 billions of people na projection from 1986, which is half of that value. So if we do not look at population explosion, we will have problem more with our people who need so much of shelter, provisions, and their essential needs. Now, population forecast across the globe based on some studies already indicated issues with respect to the need for people in the population to be provided for services and essential needs, no? So overpopulation likewise will tell us that some countries are experiencing these changes over time, and the change will have to be, let's say, Indonesia is very high. Magali, wala ta din hino. But we are part of that other countries that makes up the 41.2% of population across the globe. And what these people do? Some of them are workers, some of them are elderlies, but more of them are children. So how do we provide future generations benefit for sustainable development if we do not plan our future for them, no? This is the composition of people across the globe. The blue part is actually 1.9 billion of babies and children. And another of that are workers. Some of them are into agriculture because some are developing countries. And very few are entrepreneurs, no, sa violet side. Overpopulation creates so much problems in terms of poverty and depletions of resources, no? And this creates these issues: poverty, illiteracy, pollution, and global warming. This is an example that I've seen online. This is the scenario in India. Africa. Another problem of climate change is because of urbanization. Urbanization over time, ang usa ka rural area becoming an urban city. Urban city nga wala na prepare is like Manila, na ay downtown Manila, and then the other side is middle class communities, which are maybe Quezon City, some parts of Makati. And then, nading kay Tondo, Pasay, Caloocan, yung mga pobre. So that's disparity between social class, no? Kaya wala man na-prepare ang city to become a big metropolis. Urbanization, ingon sila, over time will become prime movers of unstable or unsustainable development because if you look at it in the trend, by 2050, magamay ang rural area, magkadaghan ang urban area. So the question is, are we prepared for that changes, especially kita, when we are into the engineering profession? In 1950, 30% of the population live in cities, gamay ra. 70% stay in the rural area because that's where development is, no? Agriculture kayo ang setups in 1950s. You can always be assured nga naka-employment, naka-pagkaon and shelter when you live in the rural area compared sa city, no? But now nabali, no? In 2050, we are expecting that 70% will already move to cities because that's where work is, that's where provisions of shelter and comfort are. But then, ang question dayon is our city sustainable? Are we looking at cities na unsustainable or cities which are livable? Kaya naka-planned ang cities, na-prepare na to ang population sa changes over time. This is an example of a city over time, which is horizontal, some are vertical, some are even encompassing river open water area. So what happens in Cagayan during Sendong is pag flood, namalhin tanan dayon kay na-realize man nga unsustainable kay mapuyo sa isa ka area nga prone to flood. And yet, if you go up naman, like Baguio, this is what happens, no? Sa mga mountain and hillside sa Baguio, even in Balay-Balay, this is what's happening now, no? Namuyo ang mga tao sa bakilid. Yeah, daw be ang question na sa dani kung mag-earthquake, no? Or is this livable city for everyone? Is it good to live in this neighborhood nga sikit-sikit ang mga balay? This is actually what we call as urban sprawl, diminishing green space because we want to place so much shelter and provision of housing for everyone, not quite planning what our intention is in terms of future generations' shelter. Another issue that creates climate change is motorization. Daghan ang sakyanan, land, water, and air modes actually creates pollution. And countries across the globe are actually kanang culprits of this motorization boom, no? In 2013 there was a study in the World Bank related to this, no? Asa ang mga sakyanan gyud kisay mga market player and market buyer. So market buyer na lang ta ingon sila 107% gikan gid sa Asia. And then 4% lang ana is contribution from Japan and Korea. Wala daw bi. So namaligya ang Japan o Korea, wa kay sila nagpalit sa ilang kaugalingon country kay gamay man ang country. Pero other parts of Asia nga becoming from developing to developed cities kay maka-afford naman sila mo buy na nang sila kwarta are 107% buying cars. Very unsustainable. And yet ang mga intelligent developed countries like Europe, no, some parts of developed countries in Asia and in the Middle East are not buying so much cars. They are rather investing on infrastructure such as trains and railways, no? Another problem of climate change is industrialization. Any byproduct of food production, production of goods and services are byproduct of industrialization and manufacturing. So over time, we know nga kung manufacture tag something, we need energy. So energy across the globe is an issue kasi some energy are not natural energy but rather man-made. Example of that is burning of coal, burning of gas and oil. It's man-made related. Ang renewable lang ana is hydro power generation. Cagayan before has a problem with power, no? Kanang dali mag-brown out, mag-black out basta dry ang season. Now, dili na kayo ng inyo ma-experience sa Cagayan because na naman tay stayag, coal, natay FDC, coal, natay Menergy nga diesel ang support system para sa Sipalco. Nga kung walay kuryente gikan sa Maria Cristina, nagyapoy kuryente sa Cagayan. Mahal nga lang because these are kanang expensive energy. And yet we have to have this because Cagayan is already a developed city, no? Okay, so pollution-wise, we're not just talking about pollutions which are man-made but also natural. But of course, kung natural, wala may problema. Kay our environment can always dissipate these natural causes of pollution. No? Ang problem is if it is man-made pollution because it's something that the environment cannot balance out. No? So pollution includes not only air but also light, noise, water, and land pollution. Domestic man na siya, industrial, or traffic-related pag man-made. Even land under ecosystem underwater. Okay. So So the convention then was made in 1962 to make sure and ensure that maritime transport that creates this oil spill will have to be sheriff, police, and then penalized. They have to clean up their spill. Kung sila'y nakasala, sila'y manglimpyo. And because they are commercial in sense, magbayad sila sa ilahang aggravation to the environment. Second, in 1971, that's after mga 9 years, what happens is that nag-create po o Ramsar Convention sa UN. The convention is really related to wetlands because na-realize nila that there are migratory birds and habitations sa wetland area nga na-aggravate because human activities and that aggravates the environment of the animals and flora and fauna in wetland area. Aside from that, sometimes human activities such as deforestation and kaning gitawag na to reclamation of land for development of housing and constructions of buildings across this area are already part of the issue then. So, nagkasinabot sila in Iran sa Ramsar Convention on Wetlands that wetlands should be protected area. So, no country, no city, no nation should be destroying wetlands. Wetlands are for migratory species of birds and wildlife that actually use this area for their propagation, no, and preservation. So, and that's the reason nga across borders, across the globe siya because migratory birds are traveling from one country to the next, no? So to protect this, they have also to protect a healthy wetlands. Okay. The next one is the MARPOL Convention. It's a prevention for pollution on water, especially for maritime application. So, kabaluta nga over time, cities and urban areas or rural areas will actually spill waste on water, solid and liquid waste on water. It will go back to or be directed to the open sea na dayon, and even open sea for shipping lines and seacraft na mag-spill pod, that's aggravated by water pollution. So in 1973, MARPOL addresses the issue that all that will actually contribute to water pollution should be penalized. So all countries agree, for those who signed, that all waste should be restricted from solid waste, in fact, will be restricted from being pushed to the open ocean, or even kanang mga liquid waste na harmful para sa environment, sa ecosystem, sa water. And then at the same time, in 1973, they created the what we call as CITES or CITES, nga Convention and policy in relation to trade of endangered species of wild fauna and fauna. So that's an example na gihatag na ko sa una na ganina nga when we have like species of what was that kind of flowers such as orchids, which are trade and exported abroad, should be restricted because these are not ecosystem or the habitations of this type of orchids, no? The same with wildlife na we trade sa market from Asia to the US or even some parts of Europe, no? Burmese, for example, nga snake are only thriving in Thailand, or Burma. The original name of Thailand is what was that? The old name of Thailand, Siam and Burma, now called as Thailand. This one are in the endemic species of kanang yellow snakes, no, sa anang country in Asia. But now we can see them in zoos, in pet shops in the US and even in Europe. So this is the convention that restricts the trade and commerce of wildlife species and endangered flora and fauna. Now, we also have the pollution law on transboundary air pollution in 1979. When countries in Europe had an issue kay ilang neighbor kay industrialized and neighbor nila nga dili industrialized, ang pollution is move from one point to the other, no? So this convention happened because in Europe, for example, industrial countries like Germany, sa pang countries na highly industrialized sa Europe, Britain, these countries are producing so much of this pollution on manufacturing and industry. And ang mga neighbor kay poor, Spain is not industrialized. France is not industrial country. So because they are connected neighbors of the continent of Europe, some of them are aggravated by pollutions in the air, no? So that for that reason, na-create ang 1979 transboundary air pollution. So kanang mga country nga exhaust of fumes of pollutions from their industrial and manufacturing are penalized because they are emitting pollutions in the air. And katong country nga ma-penalize has to pay in a sense, or to countries which have need support, no? So mo din na nga na yung mga buyout, so what we call as carbon trading. So i-research na ninyong topic, carbon trading. In the Philippines or in Asia, what happens is more recent, no? Dili sa 1979, wala man atong neighbor lagi makayo. What happens is more recent years in 2020 I think 2010, because China becomes a moving continent. Booming continent, dili moving continent. China becomes a booming continent. So what happens is naging industrialized ang China. More siya og kanang giant nga nakamata sa industrialization. So, and because of that industrialization, we are suffering from transboundary air pollution from China. So across Asia, daghan na kay Asian countries na aggravate. Like ang neighbor sa China, which is actually Taiwan, Japan, Korea, no? Kasi ang ilang pollution kay mas directed sa ilang nearest nga neighbor. And for that reason, more recent times na ingon dayon ang UN, United Nations nga China should pay for the pollution that they aggravate to Asia and some parts of Russia. But China is saying na nganong i-penalize ba ko karon pa man ko nag-industrialize, no? Dili siguro ko diretso i-penalize kay karon pa man ko na-industrialize. So hinay-hinay siya gi-penalize dili para sa uban. Sa Europe in 1979 nga penalize dira sila diretso kay gabi man ilahang paghingo sa industrialization. So China now is very supportive in addressing their issues in terms of pollution, and they are becoming amenable to the United Nations conditions in terms of transboundary air pollution. Okay. Next, in 1987, what happens is that nag-create na dayon ang scientific study and investigation on ozone layer sa stratosphere, sa atong biosphere. No? So the stratosphere is where some layers of ozone are becoming an issue because itawag nila na ozone hole. And the ozone hole is because of some pollutants such as chlorofluorocarbons, halogens, carbon tetrachloride, methyl chloroforms, and methyl chlorofluorum. Okay. And so because of that, nag-agree ang United Nations to be very careful when it comes to ozone pollutants, no? Because our ozone is a protected layer sa atong stratosphere. Ozone, kung masubraan, makadaot sa atong environment. Kung magamay, makadaot sa atong environment. Should be balanced lang daw. So, that was discussed in Montreal, Canada, ang protocol for ozone layer concerns. 2 years thereafter, na-create ang Basel Convention or Basel Convention, which is on transboundary movements of hazardous waste and their disposal. This was created because na-realize nga na yung mga country nga gadawat sa basura kay poor man sila. Napoy country nga pamaligya o gahatod sa basura kay rich man sila. So this is distribution of goods being not equal, no? Like in the Philippines, we are junk shop of mga second hand nga sakyanan sa Japan, no? That's wrong. In Japan, they have very good cars, and ang mga usable items ng cars na gidala sa ato dinhi has very bad engines na. That's why we are creating so much pollution in our air. But this convention is more on disposing of waste. Some waste are actually hazardous, like gikan sa hospitals, gikan sa mga industrial sites are hazardous. So ginaingon dinhi nga dili ka mamaligya og hazardous waste. You have to clean up your own backyard. Dili nimo ihatag sa imong silingan nga country just because ka-afford ka mo bayad and magpa-transport sa ilahan. Willing sad sila mo dawat nga wa sa kabalo nga hazardous dinhi. So that's the idea behind Basel Convention in 1980. And in 1992, we have the Biological Diversity Convention. And this was because, remember, katong sa Rio de Janeiro nga problem on using the land for clay and crops such as sunflower and soybeans. This is the rationale here because kung i-endanger nimo, kung imong bungkagon ang environment sa protected forest area, you are endangering the flora and fauna of that area. So because of this Earth Summit in Brazil, what happens is that na-create ang biological diversity and sustainable development application. So dili ta mag-develop og dili kay ta mo ingon nga develop ang atong country kung nakita nato nga dili dai siya sustainable development kay natay giguba sa atong environment na naapektahan in terms of the impact. So this was discussed in Brazil. And then for that same year, they created a framework convention on climate change because after sa Ozone Montreal Convention, na-realize nila nga we are now experiencing climate change impact. And so for that reason, a lot of countries were becoming signatories. And one of that countries is the Philippines. We signed, agreed, we commit to climate change impact, So therefore, we as a country also agreed na we will support climate change actions and plans para ma-mitigate ang impact sa environment. And for that also in 1992, nahimo na sad ang policy sa UN on transboundary effects of industrial accidents. These accidents happen because of some issues like burning or accidental burning of industry or manufacturing site because of some spillage of oil and whatnot, or example po dani ka ng nuclear leaks, no? Sa Russia, for example, na ay nuclear leaks. So what happens is that people are jeopardized in terms of their safety. And because of that, human health becomes priority, especially sa community nga dili part sa industrial site, no? Wala na narbaho sa planta sa nuclear, but yan ang ilang shelter o ilang community duol sa mga nuclear area or mga industrial area nga nasunog or nagkaroon ng leak. So this convention addresses the issue of human safety and health with respect to industrial accidents over time. And then in 1994, 2 years thereafter, because of climate change convention, na-realize nila nga na ay country nga nag-suffer in terms of desertification, no? Nagka-experience of great famine, walay crops nga nitubo because climate change affected their country, especially kay naa sila sa desert area in Africa and in some parts of the Middle East. So this is the convention that combats desertification, and the UN commits to help this country in terms of relief operations and support system, monetary and whatnot, because dili man nila blame nga nainana ilang environment. It's also because globally, kita ang nag-create sa climate change, no? That affected them as a community, as a country. And then, of course, from that, because of the desertification in some parts of Africa, na-AIDS, no? Na-AIDS support gihatag. Dili AIDS nga sakit, ha? AIDS, no? AIDS, plural, kag support for Africa. And from that, na-create dayon ang Kyoto Protocol in 1997. So we are one of the countries, again, to sign this one, that we commit to production of materials and applications of activities nga i-restrict ang carbon dioxide emission, methane, nitrous oxide, hydrofluorocarbons, petrofluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons, sulfur hexafluoride. So these are pollutants in the ozone layer that create so much greenhouse gases and at the same time climate change impact. So because of Kyoto Protocol in Japan, a lot of countries commits to support UN, United Nations agenda for the sustainable environmental applications. And then in the Philippines, because nag-sign man ta, no, sa Kyoto, Montreal, and so forth sa UN, then we are passing our laws in terms of environmental protection. So for civil engineers of the future, please be aware na naatay law, no? Kay basin kamo mismo ma-apprehend mo kay kamoy nakasala, no? Nag-build mo something na nakadaot sa environment. Okay, so the first of that is air pollution policy. So we have laws related to air pollution. We have laws for water. We have laws for land and soil preservation and pollution. And then, of course, we have laws related to our local government code. Ako siyang gi-highlight because sa una, when we apprehend people nga nakasala in terms of environment, iagi na to sa DNR. DNR will go ito national level, from region to national. Layo kayo, kay nara sa city ang concern or sa isa ka municipality, hatod sa region, isaka pa na sa sa national, and then husgahan dayon sa korte sa national level or sa Supreme Court. Layo kay tanan. So what happens with local government code is mismo ang mayor o ang council diretso maka-fight, no? Maka-apprehend, maka-police o any individual, any organization or company na naka-create og hazard sa atong environment, whether accidental or not accidental. So akong best example last time is that even ang DNR can sue the Department of Public Works and Highways because nag-create sila havoc or nag-create sila og issue sa atong mangrove sa Cagayan de Oro. Kay naglabay silang basura near sa mangrove nga nag-create og taya, no? Rust sa mga metal works from construction waste, and that metal works na taya or rust created or aggravated the growth of the mangroves near sa Makahalar Bay. And what happens now is namatay ang pila ka hectares of mangrove in Bonbon and Kauswagan area. So, kana siya nakitaan sa mga tao sa Bonbon, Barangay Bonbon, kay sila man ang nagtabak og tanom sa mangrove, no? Nagpatabang sila ng mga schools, mga volunteers sa community sa Cagayan to plant mangrove sa open water, sa mouth sa river sa Cagayan towards the open sea para ma-protect ang kaning river bank, no, to the open sea, butangan sa right side o left side ng mga mangroves. But kay nag-build magbag-og bridge sa Kauswagan, and then ang construction sa bridge requires some kaning debris nga gilabay nila unnecessarily sa river. Ang nahitabo is kato nga debris na paingon dito sa open mouth near to the mangrove, and kato mga debris nagdala og mga pollutants sa water. Kana man gud nga area is fresh water at the same time seawater nga combination. So it's what we call as brackish water. So brackish water is where most mangroves will thrive, kay brackish ang ihang water characteristics. So what happens now is na-aggravate ang mangrove and it's polluting the brackish water. So namatay ang pila ka hectares of mangrove nga gitanom sa Barangay Bonbon and Kauswagan. So karon gisu sa government sa Cagayan kay nag-complain man ang Bonbon sa mayor, and ang mayor nag-complain sa region sa DNR nato. So ang DNR gisaka sa national. So ang national gi penalize ang Department of Public Works and Highways sa Region 10 kung anong gibuhat to nila nga naka-affect sa community, naka-create og impact sa environment sa community. So, kamo nga future engineers in the future, please be aware of this. Ang imong gilabay can affect groundwater, can affect land based on solid waste, can affect the river if you throw it in the river, can affect open sea if you throw it on the open sea. So, any construction waste, anything that is not or that is human activities made over time should be restricted. An example is sa OBO, Office of the Building Official. Sa OBO na restriction kung mag-construction ka, no? Ang construction nga saba during daytime is allowed, and na ay restriction sa noise, labi na sa welding, cutting, and whatnot. But sa gabi, it's restricted because neighboring communities, duol nga hospital, duol nga mga panimalay will be affected by the noise. So this is pollution for people who are resting. Ang mga aircraft sa area nga airports or sea carts or seaports, kung saba sila, it is affecting people who are residing in residential area. So therefore, this kind of transportation are restricted in terms of their operation kung maka-affect sila. And to some extent, ginabutang sila sa area nga mingaw para dili sila maka-affect sa people residing nearest to their facility. Nasabtan? Nasabtan? So I think I'll end here because this is the last of our topic on Philippine environmental policy. I hope that it helps you to learn as much on sa akong gina-share na information. Although dili gid kay siya topic concept, but it's more on experience, and what I'm sharing is part of what I've learned so far and experience so far. So I'm hoping na ma-enrich inyong learning on your own to explore this, no? Especially sa kung i-discuss ng carbon trading. Very interesting. Okay, so for night question, it's already 4:21. So just enough time. Sorry kayo
None so far, ma'am.
medyo
Ay, ma'am,
nag-labor.
kana sa tong deadline sa kuan, ma'am, sa katong case review 1.
Tuesday, anytime on Tuesday is good. Ibutang lang dito sa folder, sa link ni Modar, no? Kaya na may folders each triad. So, isulod dayon folder sa inyong triad. Butang ni og case case study 1 para at least dito mabutang nga daan siya. Then later on, daghan na tayong tamahimo nga case studies. Quizzes and what. Sige. Please be aware na almost near na inyong deadline for the presentation. No? The presentation should be in on the kamo kay every Friday, so should be in by 19th of November during the midterms, and katong class sa E1 should be in by the 18th of November. Place it in your links again. It's a requirement for midterms. Okay? Nagamay siya ganina, niabot na ta karong 13 na lang ta. Pero anyway, Darren, naka-picture na ka for attendance. Darren?
Yes, mama na ma'am.
Okay, sige. Thank you kayo. Thank you kay Tanan for coming in today sa class. I hope that
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ang
Thank you,
PowerPoint
ma'am.
ako rin
Thank you,
ihatag
ma'am.
later, ha? Sige. Kung ihatag later ang PowerPoint. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye, ma'am.
Bye, ma'am.